target today is to improve progress monitoring and data collection and analysis for the individual education program. And so the first thing we need to establish is just what is progress monitoring. And per the IEP guidance document, which I also have linked within the body of this training or this virtual session, progress monitoring is the ongoing process of collecting and analyzing data to determine student progress towards specific skills listed in the annual goal. Now, one of the things that I talk about lots of times is that it's very, very vitally important that you understand the behaviors you're trying to measure and the tool with which you're trying to measure that behavior. Now, special education law says that we have to report on the annual goals, progress. That is part of providing a free, appropriate public education or FAPE. It's really the only definitive way that we have to really prove what it is that we have done with that student in terms of implementing that IEP, letting that IEP come to life. And it tells us if the student's making progress on the goals, but it also can be used to inform our instructional decisions. It can be a guide for us. It can help us to make adjustments to the specially designed instruction that we're providing our students. And it can really provide you some data that you need to really make decisions for your students. If they're not making tremendous progress, then we should be doing something different. And there are things that we'll talk about later. What are some of those things that we can do differently? We can come back to the ARC table and we can talk about maybe shifting the goal just a bit, or we can talk about maybe trying a new strategy that we've maybe got in our toolkit and applying that. And there's things that we do to our progress monitoring graphs and charts that we're supposed to keep once we do those kinds of things. So this is rooted in regulation. I've got linked for you here the Kentucky Administrative Regulations for Special Education. And it's also part of our compliance. It's part of the compliance indicators on IEP development. We know that the IEP guidance document tells us that we must progress monitor. We must have certain things that tell us whether or not, through a visual interpretation of the data, is the student making progress? If the student is not making enough progress, what are we doing? Those are the big things. And then really, really understanding some verbs that we put in our goals sometimes cannot be measured. We put some verbs in there that like improves or increases, and you can't, or to know, things like that you can't really put a measurement on, and you can't use a particular tool to even measure that to see exactly what the student is saying or doing. So when we go back, we look at an IEP shall include a statement of how the child's progress toward meeting the annual goals will be measured and when those periodic reports will be given. Now, we know that for all students, they get a progress report. They get a report card. Those are the grades they get for the classes they're enrolled in. But this is a little beyond that. You have an IEP. It's not intended to be the entire curriculum, but it's certainly a tool that we delineate for students with disabilities that they need a little more intense instruction. They need a little bit more attention. They maybe need an accommodation or whatever's included in that. But we need to look to see if our IEP, if our SDI, all the things that we're laying out there for the student, if they're being effective, if our instruction's effective. If not, then we make a change. And so we collect graph and interpret progress data to make instructional decisions. When developing an IEP, it says the service provider selects methods of measurement and develops specific measurement tools that align to and can measure each measurable annual goal. Straight out of the guidance document. The service provider then develops and uses a computer-generated graph to capture all progress monitoring data collected from the specific measurement tool. Now, within Infinite Campus, there is a new monitoring goal tool, and it will do the graph for you, and it makes it really nice. So you just have to put the raw data in, and it'll spit out there for you based on those goals. but you still have some work to do. You have to do the analysis. You have to look at what that data is telling you. Is that data trending toward the attainment of that goal sometime in the future? A goal is set for 1 year. What is it we can do for this student in 1 year in regards to this discrete skill deficit? And what is it that we can monitor that is going to tell us if he's made enough progress? And along the way, we can see if, based on that visual representation, that graph and that tool we're using and some of those things, we can see if that student is trending that way. And if they're not, then we make a change. So when periodic reports on the progress the child is making toward meeting the annual goal, which may include the use of quarterly or periodic reports concurrent with the issuance of report cards. So as often as we send report cards home, we have to send these progress reports home. And in the IEP guidance document, there are some really good things in that guidance document that talks about if a student's making some progress, if a student's making no progress, what that analysis should look like. And we'll cover that a little bit later. But, this graph that we're talking about, it should have a title. It should have a baseline criterion. It should have a percentage that we're trying to shoot for. And also that percentage at the beginning. That baseline is included in our present levels on our IEP first page. If we're talking about academic performance, we've come up with a discrete skill like reading fluency, and we're going to work on a timed reading fluency measure, and we're going to measure that with a probe, and that's a curriculum-based measure. Then we're going to have a baseline percentage that student, we've developed that baseline over giving them 4 to 6 probes, and we're going to set that baseline, and then we're going to work toward moving that student at a desired rate of progress along that aim line, and we're going to see those data points. That's going to be our trend line. We're going to actually see the progress there in that visual representation. So, so it says here to determine progress, the trend line, the actual rate of progress, and the aim line, the desired rate of progress, are compared. So we want to see how far we are away from the desired rate of progress, what that trend line is telling us, and we have rules that dictate what we do. If we have an extremely large number of data points over, like 4 to 6 data points that come up well below the aim line, in layman's terms, we would just increase support. And if we have data points that are well above that line, we would then, the aim line, if we have, a trend line that's well above that, we got 4 or 5 way above where we think, and that it's clear that the student has too much support, we would reduce support, or we would look at changing that goal. And so we do that visually by, indicating through a vertical line on that graph. And we'll take a look at that here in just a second and show you visually what that looks like. So I've got here in green, measurable verb. A measurable verb is the verb you ask yourself, is it able to be seen? Can you hear? Can you count or time that action? Okay. Can you see it? Can you hear it? Can you count it? Can you time it? Now, I've linked here Bloom's measurable verbs, which I really, really like. This is Bloom's taxonomy, and I'm going to take you to this. Now, I really like the way this Bloom's taxonomy of action verbs is provided for us. Certainly, one of the things that we would say is when we look at, this taxonomy, we would realize that at the bottom level of Bloom's taxonomy, this is a knowledge level. So we see verbs where the student's going to be recalling information, recognizing information and ideas, and principles in the which are approximate form in which they are learned. So we would say, hey, arrange, define, describe, identify, label, list, those types of things. Now, you ask yourself, as you look at that list of verbs, can you see the student do that? Can you count it? Can you put some quantifiable data on that action? And if you can't do that, then you've probably got a verb that's not measurable. And it's perfectly, we see when we do folder reviews in around the region, and when we're working with teachers, instructional assistants, whatever, we see sometimes that you'll have all 6 components in that goal, and there'll be a verb there. But look at this list of verbs, and there's also a list of verbs in the IEP guidance document. It's not a laundry list, but it's a list of verbs that are supposed to be measurable. And I don't see increase on here. I don't see, does anyone see no on here? To increase, to improve. Those are examples, those are non-examples of a measurable verb. We like to talk about Anita Archer lots of times. You guys know I really like Anita Archer. So if we're comparing and contrasting what's a verb that's measurable and not measurable, we know that there are measurable verbs, and we ask ourselves as we think about these words, can we see it? Can we hear it? Can we count it? Can we time it? So, and as you move from the knowledge level to the comprehension level, you see what the student is doing. So this kind of helps frame, along with the guidance of those standards-based IEPs and looking at the Kentucky Academic Standards, we also are framing, how complex is the task that we're asking the student to do. And through universal design for learning and through really neat high leverage practices, we can work all the way down this continuum for our students. We can have them judging and critiquing and justifying and appraising things at the evaluation level in special education if we just scaffold that information, if we work with that student and we teach them to do these types of things through alternative assignments. We, through universal design for learning, we can give them alternative ways to overcome their disability. We can accommodate, we can scaffold, and we would like to see, at some point as the student continues on with us receiving services, we would like to see you move from the knowledge level to the evaluation level, if you will. And sometimes it's not possible. We understand that. And sometimes progress is just a little bit of progress, and any progress can be really good. But we just want to think about that and make sure that we understand that in order to write a good goal, you first have to have a measurable, quantifiable, countable, seeable, timeable, and a verb that can be heard that is written into our goal. So I'm going to go right back over here. And I just wanted to show you that. And then I'll also just pull up really quickly the IEP guidance document. Now, everything we do has the backdrop of the IEP guidance document. If you go to the contents page, you can really quickly access progress monitoring here. This whole section on it, okay? And down at the bottom of this section, let's see if I can get down there without making everybody dizzy. This is really where the meat of this presentation comes from. And you can see that the information that we're sharing with you is right here. There's that analysis of data that we're going to get to here in just a second. But I wanted to show you really quickly that I'm not making these things up. They've got them alphabetized. And look here at K. You do not see no, K-N-O-W, or to know. You do not see increase, those types of things. So these are things that we can see, count, hear, and time. Notice it says it's not an exhaustive list. Of course, you can come up with different ones, as long as you can see it, count it, hear it, and time it. And then we can find the correct tool with which to measure that. So I'm going to switch back over to the presentation itself. And I'm going to just share with you a goal that has the components. It has, during small group reading instruction, JD will remain on task for 15 minutes on 2 of 3 trials on daily duration recordings. Now, can we see JD remain on task? Yes, we can. Can we measure it with time? Yes, we can. We can say, and can we operationally define remain on task in our short-term objectives? Yes, we can. So we want to make sure that we know exactly what remaining on task means there. And so, through our short-term objectives, we can operationally define that task, and we can make sure, because we know we can see it and we know we can count it or time it, as to how long that student's going to stay on under that really specific circumstance. Now, the circumstance is that part right at the beginning of the goal during small group reading instruction. That is the part that's going to set up the measurement. Okay, that's going to set the stage for the measurement. That's going to be the prompt or whatever the conditions under which we're going to measure the verb. Now we see remain on task is going to be the verb. And then we see that duration recordings, which we're going to show you a duration recording here in just a second. We see that the student's going to attempt to stay on task 15 minutes. Now, if we link that back to our present level, maybe the student can't stay on task but for 7 minutes at this point. And that's what we've established the baseline as. But during small group reading instruction, for whatever reason, he's getting distracted. We want to put him in that treatment, and we want to look at seeing if we can increase here the number of minutes or see him remain on task during that particular setup. It's important to remember that when establishing a baseline with one particular measure, you must use the same tool or measurement throughout the progress monitoring cycle. Now, I will tell you that there's lots of times when I go out and review files. There's lots of times when Brenda goes out and reviews files. There's lots of times when we go out and review those files, and we see that the components are there, but there's not an embedded tool. And we know that we were talking about the embedded tool here being the duration recording. And so let's just go down and look at that duration recording for a second, and let's see what that looks like. So a duration recording, by definition, documents the length of a behavior by recording the time from the beginning of the behavior to the ending of the behavior. This measurement is helpful when your primary concern is the length of time the student engages in the behavior. And you may operationally define it as out of his seat, throwing tantrums, off task. He may be wandering around, not looking at the particular assignment. He may be talking to someone, whatever it might be. But you know what that on-task behavior looks like, and you've defined it, and the student knows well what that is, and it requires an instrument to track the time. So let's look. I think I linked here one that we can look at. So we have a duration recording. We have a duration recording form. And you notice here it says, this is just how easy it is to take this data. You got this form with you. The students in the reading lab, students within that small group reading instruction, and we date it, put the student's name up here, where it located. We describe the target behavior, and we just then see what time of day it is, and we say what time did the behavior begin and what time did the behavior end. Total duration of behavior. Now, in order to get that all right compliance-wise, you need to have a baseline number of minutes that student has been able to show over 4 to 6 data points, an average amount of time that they can stay on task. And then we're going to try to work on getting that number of minutes increased up. And so that's a duration recording. Now let's go back to our presentation just for a second here. And we see that, and these things are from your, what I have here is just a list of those types of things that you would see in the guidance document. We have a drop-down box in Infinite Campus, and it tells us, it asks us what the method of measurement is that you've chosen, and it's a direct measure. And these are the things that you would see quite readily as a direct measure. And these are the things that you would see as an indirect measure. Now, a direct measure is when you're sitting there with the student and you're looking right at that student. And then an indirect measure would be, like when you're grading a rubric, or you're looking at a checklist, or you're looking at a scoring guide, or you're looking at some piece of work they've done, like a permanent product or teacher-made test, and you're going to grade that test, and they're not going to be with you. And then we have curriculum-based measures, oral reading fluency probes. We have math computation probes. Lots of times those are done under a time constraint. And then we also have authentic measures, and those are student interview, conference, oral interview, portfolio, work samples, annotation. Now, keep in mind, when you choose the authentic measure, you'll also have to choose another one because it will not stand alone. So if you choose, like, you're going to do an oral interview and you take a bunch of anecdotal notes, Well, how are you going to turn that into a quantifiable data? You're going to have to put another measure with that in order to be able to progress monitor. So we have some others, and when we're doing behavior, we're looking at behavior, or we're looking at reading, developing word per minute or whatever it might be. Some of these we need to make sure that we always embed the appropriate tool with the appropriate verb. Can't tell you how important that is, that you understand that. So, if you're talking about the goal that we shared earlier, we see that duration recording will measure the duration of how long that student stayed on task, and so we would have that to tell us. So very, very important that, and it's also important to note that if you establish a baseline around that remaining on task, if that student stays on task for 8 minutes and you measured that using a duration recording, then when you come back and you do that within the annual goal, you need to use a duration recording. And so you don't want to mix those up. That's like comparing apples to oranges. You don't want to change the measure that you're using for those annual goal measurements. You want to use the same one that you use for baseline. So let's look at an interval recording for just a second. Does the behavior occur so frequently that it may be difficult to count it accurately? So in this instance, we would do an interval of time, and the definition says it involves observing whether a behavior occurs or does not occur during the specified time period. So identify the lengths and break down into equal time periods. And this is what and I linked this from Vanderbilt University. They have a lot of good resources through the Iris Peabody school there, the education school. And so this one is an interval recording, and it's using a 10-second interval. And then you see a partial interval, or you're going to use a whole interval. So here's the steps. Determine a specific time period to observe, divide into equal intervals. The interval should be no longer than 30 seconds. Draw a series of boxes that represents intervals. In each box, simply mark if the behavior does or does not occur within that interval. And then, for a partial interval, you would mark if the behavior occurs at any point during the interval. And for a whole interval, you only mark if the behavior occurs for the entire interval. So that's an interval recording, and that one's that's one that you can use if going back to our question, does the behavior occur so frequently that it may be difficult to count accurately? So maybe we just want to take a sampling. It's the same thing for the momentary time sample. It's just a different type of interval recording that we're kind of used to in special education, because we get those momentary time samples as teachers and as administrators when we're doing a Medicaid audit, or we're participating within a district that does Medicaid. So then can you easily count every time the behavior occurs? So an event recording, and we're going to run out of time if I go too deep into this, but an event recording is that one that each time a student engages in target behavior, we just count it. We just mark it. It's a tally mark. Or we move, a pen, maybe a bobby pin or a stick pin from one jacket pocket to the other jacket pocket. Or we've got, a little counter on our wrist, or whatever it might be. But we just use tally marks most of the time on the collection form. And I'll show you real quick what that looks like. Got that one linked in as well. So we just capture this, of course, we fill it out, we put the target behavior, and this one would, how many times does the student raise their hand within a particular period of time? Okay. And so during the observation, each time the target behavior observed, mark a tally mark in the appropriate column under behavior occurrence here. And at the end of the observation period, add up the tally marks and place the total number in the appropriate column. So you would total up the number, you'd put the date and the time that you took that data. And then you would transfer all that data to what we're going to talk about next, which would be this find this one right here real quick. And so we would transfer that data from those sheets as data points here, okay? And so we've done this one for you. This is what one would look like. This is an Excel spreadsheet. This is an old one before Infinite Campus came along and started doing this. And Infinite Campus just got theirs up and running, in the last month or two. And so people are starting to train on that. And of course, we're going to do some training on it as well. But so you're looking during small group instruction, or small reading group instruction, it should say, JD will remain on task for 15 minutes as measured with a daily duration recording on 3 of 4 trials daily. Okay, so the goal is a little bit different. We've established right here on the far left-hand column, that line is typically blue. Okay, so we would draw a blue line here vertically to show that that's where the baseline starts. So right now, this student, he's at 10 minutes. Okay, that's his baseline. And then we start taking data under this particular treatment, and we see that it starts to get 6, 5, 6, 4. And we're thinking, okay, well, he's not really close to the aim line. We don't know if he's going to get to 15 minutes. He's down here at 4. What do we need to do? We need to talk about it. We need to maybe try a different strategy and see if there can be any improvement. And right here, we make another black vertical line here. And we then say, oh, yeah, we see that he's getting a little closer to the trend line. So we keep on going. And yeah, he's real close to the trend line. We keep on going. Maybe this is a break in the action. So we would, if we have a break, like a 2-week break for Christmas, or sometimes we'll have a 1-week break at Thanksgiving, we would say we would want to figure out what his baseline is before the break, and then figure out what the baseline is when we come back from the break by doing several probes. And that might be what that is indicating. Okay. And so then you could go on, but if those data points were way down here, we would need to make some instructional changes, make some change to the support that we're in, the scaffolding that we're doing for the student, and we'd try to move him closer to this 15 minutes. And we would do this all year long. And you can see that all we're doing is entering raw data here. It's 6 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 4 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes. Now, and so that raw data goes in there. But then we would also see that, after a particular time, we would have to make some kind of analysis on that. And we would see if the trend is occurring in the way that we need it to trend. And so we would write the analysis. And we got the written analysis in here. And you can see what that says. JD was still very close to the baseline score after explicit instruction. 115, we analyzed data, made an instructional change. That didn't require a meeting, but we just kind of changed that strategy, and we continued on. Now, if you have to change the goal, you have to have an ARC meeting, and that would be one where maybe the actual trend line is well above the aim line here. So we got the aim line drawn through there, and we're well above that. So we'd make a change, say the goal's too easy, or we don't have enough support. The goal's way too hard. Do we need to change the goal? If we do that, we have to do that through an ARC meeting. So the student is currently able to sustain attention for 11 minutes, but has yet to do that in 3 out of 4 consecutive trials. So now we would also want to recognize here that our dates match the frequency in our goal. Frequency is daily here. Okay, how often are we going to take data? And down here, on this line, we have 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Now, daily is hard to do because you can run into some problems, but we wanted to just show you that as an example. You can have a student miss, or you can have the person that's trained to take the data miss, or something like that. So you have to really think about daily, but daily data really provides you with strong trend data. So the stronger, or the more you take data, the theory is that the trend data that you get from that's going to be a lot stronger. Okay, so this is kind of the thing you should be having in your folders. There's a question, I think it's question number 38 in the record review document. And if you're taking data as an instructional assistant, you would take that data, and maybe the teacher would guide you into placing those data points in there for her, or entering that data into the database. So, and then the computer would do its work and it would spit out this graph for you. So we want to make sure that, you know, when we're doing progress monitoring, that we're establishing that baseline. So I want to talk a little bit right now about the establishment of the baseline. Now, we also have this linked into our IEP coaching tool that we worked on this year. It's a really good tool, and we can share that with you at any time. If you desire to have that, you can just send me an email. You guys know my email. It's denny.may@pikeville.kyschools.us, and I'll put that back up at the end. But here is just a sheet that we put together that gives you the directions for establishing a baseline. How to establish a baseline. Which data source will we use? Will data come from progress monitoring of previous goals, or will it come from the data derived from new probes? Now, what we're talking about there is we got to consider IEP cycles. We got to look back to the present level and look back to the baseline in those last 4 to 6 data points from a previous IEP if we're moving forward. And we have some rules that dictate that. We look at 4 to 6 data points and we come up with that average. There's a way to do that average. We do the mean and the median, and that we can talk about that a little bit as well here later. But just want to make sure, will data come from progress monitoring or previous goals, or will it come from data derived from new probes? Now, I have this question posed to me by new teachers lots of times, and even some emerging teachers and even some veteran teachers. A big push from the State Department has been to have baseline information with quantifiable data in your present levels. That's been an emphasis all year long for us. And so we'll have things said to us like this in the field. I don't have data point. I don't have a baseline because the previous teacher did not do progress monitoring. Well, if the previous teacher didn't do progress monitoring and you're the new case manager, you should do the probes and establish the baseline yourself around those areas in which, you know, the standards guide it, but also you're in that area. If you're in reading comprehension and fluency is the discrete skill, then you would do those probes around fluency. You would take those fluency measures, you'd do 6 of those, you'd take an average of those if you're doing the mean, or if you had an outlier score, you could do the median, and you could take the middle score or average the 2 middle scores together if you got that. And we'll look at that process in just a second. But new probes must be conducted if no data exists. When do I need to administer new probes? If no data exists, if a new discrete skill has been identified and the need for that student in that overall bigger area, that reading comprehension area, if we identify, oh, well, maybe it's not fluency. Maybe it's the fact that the student really lacks some skill in phonemic skills, you know, the phonemes, the phonics area, the phonemic awareness, or whatever it might be. Or if a small segment of the baseline has changed, you know, administer new probes if any circumstance, behavior, or method of measurement has changed as you're moving those goals ahead. Now, what we're talking about is IEP cycle. Maybe the kid didn't reach that goal. Do we need to bring that one forward? You can bring that forward and keep that goal the same without having too much scrutiny if you increase the criterion percentage. So let's say the goal before was 70, maybe you're going to move that to 80 this time, and maybe his baseline has moved from 60% to 65% or 50% to 60%. So you could use that same goal as long as you don't change the circumstance, the behavior, or the method of measurement. Now, if you change that, you got to do new probes. And so that's something you really need to think about as you're moving forward, because that happens all the time where you're looking at that progress data from before, and there should be an analysis of that data included in your conference summary. And that's also in the IEP guidance document for you to digest at a later time. So filtering process that leads to baseline data. We review the evaluation data. We look at the screener information. We may look at the RTI data. We may look at the classroom data, the integrated report. And this tells us, hey, the student's got a problem with reading. All right, big area. Now we know more specifically the student's got reading. We look at the RTI data. We look at the classroom data. The student cannot understand what they're reading. They can't answer questions in regards to comprehension. So what do? We look at that skill. What skill is causing the problem? and we keep funneling it down. Identify those skill deficits, review the performance on previous goals and compare to grade level standards, prioritize skills for instruction, and we take that measurable verb, and if it's read or if it's answer questions, or if it's to read a passage or whatever it is we're doing within reading, we set that as the goal and we determine what the baseline is and we establish that within the present level. Okay, so they already are. The ARC discussion takes into account variables like rate of learning, time left in school, the impact of goal moving toward expected similar rate performance. And what that's talking about is we're always wanting to think about where our student is in terms of how much time they have left in school. So, a goal that might be learning to read, in those lower grades, and we would really be hammering those discrete skills. But then as we move along, we get into high school, it might be that we look at that a little differently. So we have to keep that all in mind, and then what their rate of learning is, what's the expected similar age performance moving forward, and how much time they have left in school. So identify a tool that will measure the skill deficit. The method selected must be a tool that will measure the behavior skill selected. And then we're talking about, I went through this just a little bit ago. How do I determine whether I use median or mean? So I've taken 4 probes. Let's say the student's going to read a passage, 1-minute passage, and the student's we're going to measure how many words they can read in 1 minute. Okay. We would take 4 to 6 data points or 3 to 4 data points, and we would determine the mean. That is when we take all the scores, the raw scores, and we were using the example of how many words read per minute, and we would take those 4 scores and put them together and divide by the number of scores. So to find the central tendency, you simply add all the scores together, and from those 3 to 4 data point raw scores, you divide by the number of scores. Now, if you have an outlier, what is an outlier? This is the other way you can do the baseline. If you have an outlier, if you have a data set with the following raw scores, you could use the median. You have a 32, a 34, and a 36. Now, if you had all that, you could just average those 3 together and get your mean, okay? And that would be no problem. But now you got a 98 over here for some reason. That's an outlier score, okay? That's really going to skew your data. It's really going to impact the overall data. If you added all 4 of those together, it's going to jack that score up, maybe to an inappropriate level, and we're not going to get, good, hard data that's done with fidelity. So with the outlier, we say, let's use the median. So we take, we order them from least to greatest. We order the set. We rank order them, 32, 34, 36, and 98. And with 4 scores, we can take the 2 middle scores here, and we can add them together and divide by 2, and we come up with 35. Now, if we only had 3 scores, and we didn't have this outlier, and we were just going to do the median, there would be no reason to really do that, but you could just take that middle score there. An even number of scores in the data set, find the middle 2 scores and add those raw scores together and divide by 2. If you have an odd number of scores after rank ordering the scores, find the middle number. Okay? So that's the way you do baseline, and that's what the guidance document teaches us is the 2 ways that we would do that. So we've already talked about the trend line, the aim line. Now let's, for this last part, let's really focus in on page 69 of the IP guidance document. Now, you see here that we have placed on the left-hand column, student not progressing, a student progressing, and a student meeting the goal, and then what it would look at the end of the cycle. Now, this information right here at the bottom, what it would look at the end of the annual review analysis, should be included in your documentation in your conference summary, okay? It also should be somewhere, attached to your progress data. Now, you keep progress data in a file, and if the State Department asks you to look at your files and they want progress data, you have to give that file to them. You have to make it readily available. It's okay to keep it outside the file, but you can also keep it inside the file. But when you get to that end of that cycle and you're doing an annual review, there should be some progress monitoring data that's shared both within the conference summary, and also it should be housed within your file. Okay, so let's look at just what it says for a minute here. Let's look and see just exactly what it is that we're talking about. John is currently not on target to meet his goal in reading fluency. His data indicated that an instructional change was needed due to scores dropping from 52% to 45%. On 1/25/2019, repeated reading was added as a strategy to teach reading fluency. So you would probably see on your graph that we looked at, there's a vertical line there somewhere. They made a change, an instructional change. After 3 more data points, choral reading was added, as another instructional change was required due to scores dropping from 45 to 32. Since this strategy has been implemented, John's skills increased to 48% from 45%. Progress will continue to be monitored utilizing this instructional strategy. So they'll keep on going with that student right now. The jury's still out. Is he making enough progress? Is he trending toward meeting the goal? You know, and you might need to say here as well, what is the goal? Just to let the parent know, if you're sending this home as a progress report, what is the goal? Is it 70%? What is the goal? And then a student progressing. At the beginning of the reporting period, Charlie was not making progress toward his goal in reading fluency. 11/15/2019, due to scores of 49, 48, 45, and 48. Paired reading was added as an instructional strategy to increase reading fluency. Since that strategy began, he's increased to 62%. However, the 2 most recent data collection opportunities have shown a decrease. This could be due to Charlie missing several days of school with the flu. This strategy will continue being implemented. So you're trending in the right way, but you have a little drop here. There might be some reason for it. You capture that, you keep that anecdotally, and you share that with the parent. And so that's really progress monitoring the goal there. And then a student meeting the goal, you have that as well, based on data. Currently exceeding her articulation goal. She began this progress reporting period. S sounds in all positions of words. So this sounds like a speech goal here. 63% accuracy, and is now producing them at 80% of the time. The focus will now be on generalizing this skill across all academic areas. Progress will continue to be monitored. And then this all-important annual review analysis that goes in your conference summary and should be kept with your last progress data sheet. Once a year, when the ARC is reviewing the IEP and developing a new IEP, the end of the IEP cycle analysis is to be completed. The year-end analysis of progress toward measurable annual goals is typically documented in the conference summary. I already said that. And it must include the baseline at the beginning of the IEP cycle, progress on the measurable annual goal from baseline to the end of the cycle, what SDI we used, what strategies were effective, what changes we made, did we change the goal, what was it? And keep in mind, if you change the goal, you got to have an ARC meeting, because that's not a non-programmatic change, but that's a programmatic change. So we see here then that they've captured all that information. So let's go back over that one more time. You got to have the baseline. You got to have progress on the measurable annual goal. And you should have this anecdotally written out, captured in longhand, but you also should be able to show them this graphically, so that it's a graph form that's easily understood and that we can share that with parents, okay? And what SDI we use, what strategies we used, what changes did we make, okay? And that's really the way you do it, okay? Here's another example of an annual review analysis. Brandon's baseline for answering comprehensive questions at the 2nd grade level was 40%. His goal was to answer 5 with 80. So so we know what he was shooting for. And then they go in the first 6 weeks. He initially made steady progress with the support of explicit instruction, modeling, and visual strategies, which helped Brandon answer 4 out of 5 comprehension questions. As teacher assistance faded, his progress toward the goal of answering comprehension questions decreased, with 3 data points below the aim line. Instructional changes included teacher modeling, use of think alouds and visual strategies, or a story map. Along with these instructional changes and his current SDI, Brandon began to make progress once again. Steady progress continued, with Brandon meeting and exceeding his goal of answering 4 out of 5 comprehension questions at 85% accuracy. Brandon did not show regression after breaks in instruction. Now, that's important because we have to answer a question. Is this student a candidate for extended school year? Extended school year is a program that seeks to maintain what the student has learned from the previous year. So when we have this, and we've done this with fidelity, we can say this student did not regress to the point that he could not recoup within 6 weeks what he had lost after long breaks. And we can say they're not a candidate for ESY. We can't make those sweeping decisions about ESY and just say all students with severe disabilities get to have ESY. We have to look at the progress data. That's why it's so important that we do progress data. This is another reason why we do progress data. And progress monitoring is so important. It's such a big part of FAPE. Okay, so let's go back up to the top and let's just review for a second. So we know what progress monitoring is now. We know we're collecting data. We know that we have, in order to be effective, we have to really understand the verbs that we saw in the Bloom's taxonomy. We have to make sure that we can match the verb to one of these measures that will actually measure the verb that's included in the IEP guidance document. And then we have to take data, you know, and so a teacher may be taking the data, an instructional assistant may be taking the data, whomever's taking the data, we've got forms for you to do that. Then the data has to be, in an overall sense, we have to make sure that the form that we're using, the tool that we're using, it will in fact measure the verb that we've selected. We can see it, we can count it, we can hear it, we can time it. And then we understand how to establish that baseline. We know where the baseline is. We know how that goal got to be that goal because he had a baseline of this and we're going to shoot for this criterion score at the end of the IEP cycle. And so it's very important that you have that connection from your present level to the goal and that percentage works together and that the tool that you got that baseline with is still the tool that you have embedded in the goal. And then you start to look at analyzing that data and you put that in a form that can be very easily seen with visual representation. And then you start to document your analysis of that. And I'll leave you with this. We do IEPs to improve student performance. We do IEPs to close academic achievement gaps, to close functional gaps, to work with students to give them access to the general curriculum. We do IEPs to see if the student's making progress. We do progress monitoring to see if the IEP is being effective. And you know, we talk about the Andrew case a lot at KVEC within compliance and within IEP development. But the one thing that got those folks in trouble, the biggest thing in my mind that got them in trouble with Andrew, they had a student that had been going to school and he was having the same goal year after year after year. They didn't change any of the criteria. They didn't look at making any instructional changes. They didn't have a behavior intervention plan. They didn't do anything to respond to what was going on with that student. Don't be that teacher that sits out there. Don't be that instructional assistant that sits out there and allows this to go on with our students, because it is a charge of ours to provide a free, appropriate public education. These students are entitled to a free, appropriate public education, one that's unique to them. We know that Andrew taught us you can't copy and paste. You have to meet the student where they are. You have to, in fact, determine where their present level is, and that's what we do with baseline. We have goals that are appropriate and measurable, and then we measure those goals and we say, you know what, we can prove to you that we've done something with this student because we have this progress monitoring, and we can show you through these work samples, we can show you through this performance data that this student, in fact, has received instruction. It's been specially designed instruction. It's been geared toward him in light of his unique circumstances, in light of his disability, and he is then being provided FAPE. We also include parents in this discussion. We ask parents what they think should be on those IEPs, and we share this progress data with them. We include that overall analysis with those ARC members when we do our conference summary, and then we've done the complete job. We decide what are the skills. We also do goals for high school students. We do IEPs for high school students to include transition, okay? So the post-secondary goal becomes the focal point. How are they going to do after high school? What are they going to do after high school? And all those barriers we start working on at about age 14 or grade 8, and we start looking at what courses do they need to take? And you know, we really work on getting that data correct as well, because that becomes the focal point. And then we link it back to the instructional problems, or how are they going to have problems functionally, and what employment problems do we see. So this all works hand in hand. But you know, when you're talking about progress monitoring, it's very, very key that you understand the behavior, that the behavior is in fact measurable, and in fact that you've chosen a tool that you can measure that behavior with.